So this morning I want to go over a couple of articles about the conspiracy of the world governments to create a one world government and why and how exactly that scheme is going to fail. It failed the first time they tried a one world government, and we will get started with that particular event that became a failure that would live in infamy forever. Genesis 11, starting in verse 1. Let's go to Strong's Concordance. And the whole world was of one language. Today, the world has conquered the language barrier. So in a sense, because of all the capabilities now, modern technology that overcomes language barriers, people from all over the world can watch this video and can see the closed captioning, essentially reading what I'm saying, reading what is coming out of my mouth. Google, Safari, whatever web browser that you use can translate anything for you. So the world has essentially become of one language now, and of one speech. And it came to pass that they set out to journey aforetime. Aforetime. Does it mean from the east or formerly from the east? Interesting. Aforetime from the east. And they found a plain, a valley, in the land of Shinar, and they lived there. And they said to one another, let us go and make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, let us build us a city, a tower, where the head of it reaches to the sky. Now that's the proper word, reaches to the sky, like a skyscraper. Their version. Well, the world today has built many skyscrapers. They just built one. Okay? And let us make us a name. What name? Well, there are all kinds of names. Today, you have Russia, Europe, the Americas, okay? But they wanted to be unified in a one world government. There was not that many people there. But they wanted to be unified, lest we be scattered upon the face of the whole earth. Sounds like one world government to me. And when they did this, not the Lord, it does not say the Lord, it never will say the Lord, no matter what King James Version tells you, Jehovah came down to see the city. He came down For what reason? To see the city and the tower which the children of men were building. Now, listen very, very, very carefully. And Jehovah, not the Lord, said, look, this people is one, and they have all one language. And look what they are doing. And now nothing will be made inaccessible. Nothing will be withheld from them if they were allowed to continue this course of action. Take a look around you. Nothing. Nothing at all. Everything a man dreams up, including GPT or whatever you want to call it, nuclear annihilation, anything that a man can dream up, it has not been restrained. Now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. That is exactly what is going on right now. Back then they had to be stopped because they would have gotten to this point where we're at right now very quickly. And one of the ways to get to this point is to overcome, well, that's one of the big ways, is to overcome the language barrier. The language barrier stopped mankind from reaching the point of global annihilation, which is where we are today. Go down there and confound their speech. Balal their speech. Confuse, confound their speech, so that they may not understand one another's speech. So Jehovah dispersed or scattered them abroad from the face of all the earth, and they ceased to building the city. Therefore the name of it is called Babel, because Jehovah did confound the language of all the earth, and from there did Jehovah scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. Today we are at that point again. I'm going to read to you a couple of articles, like I said in the beginning. Read you a short one and a long one. John Kerry declares war on U.S. farmers. This is on the People's Voice. Government farm confiscations not off the table. Small farms are significant emitters of nitrogen, according to Biden's climate czar, John Kerry, who's pushing for the U.S. federal government to crack down on farming in America to combat global warming. Now, the farms that are emitting the most nitrogen would be cattle feedlots, chicken farmers, Amish farmers, yeah, right? But nitrogen is a natural thing. Nitrogen has been produced since the beginning of time. But let's continue. Kerry insists that the United States must massively reduce farming so that people will have nothing to eat, you see, to meet radical green agenda goals laid out by the World Economic Forum and United Nations. According to former Secretary of State, the world can't tackle climate change without first addressing the agriculture sector's emissions, and farmers in the U.S. are front and center of his plans. A lot of people have no clue that agriculture contributes about 33% of emissions of the world, he said in his keynote address. We can't get to net zero. We don't get this job done unless agriculture is front and center as part of solution. So all of us understand here the depths of this mission. Now, the term net zero. Net zero. What is net zero? What celestial body could you describe as net zero? The moon. Nothing can live on the moon because it is net zero. When they tell you that we want to do net zero, that means they want to kill all living things off the face of the earth. That's essentially what they mean. When everything becomes inert. Net zero that's what it is. They can sit there and say that that's not what it means, but zero is zero. That means zero life. Delivering these remarks at the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate Summit held in Washington, D.C., Kerry neglected to acknowledge the undeniable fact that the agricultural industry plays a vital role in providing sustenance and ensuring the survival of all approximately 8 billion people worldwide. That's exactly why he wants to destroy farming. He wants to destroy man off the face of the earth. These elitists which run the world want to destroy all mankind off the face of the earth. Okay? And were it not for prophecy, they would succeed. Were it not for the words of Jehovah, they would eventually succeed in their quest to wipe out all human life. In recent months, leaders in the Western countries have significantly intensified their criticism of the farming sector. In the Netherlands, regarded as a testing ground of the World Economic Forum's anti-farming agenda, the Dutch government has been implementing initiatives to seize farmland. The Dutch government's proposal to confiscate and close down numerous farms to comply with the objective outlined in the Global Climate Agenda has received support from the European Union. The unelected European Commission in Brussels has endorsed a plan by the Netherlands Prime Minister Mark Rutte, who is a contributing member of the World Economic Forum. Recently, the governing body of the European Union officially endorsed measures to compel farmers to vacate their lands as part of EU's Natura 2000 scheme, which categorizes farms as significant emitters of nitrogen. Under the plan, farmers would be offered 20% of their farm's value through a buyout program. However, those who declined this offer would face a big risk of being forcibly removed from their land without any financial compensation. If this plan proves to be successful, it is likely to be replicated in other countries due to its alignment with the WEF's global environmental agenda. Now, where did this all start? Well, you could say it all started back in the days of Babel, and that would be correct, but I'm talking in recent times. So this is article altmarket.us, the Club of Rome. Folks, don't ever forget. Never, never, never forget that all of what we see today originated in Rome. Even the Rome statute, you can look it up, originated in Rome. It's Roman agenda. This is a Roman agenda. So, as you can see, when they had this big meeting way back in the early 1970s, to late 1970s, or even earlier than that, they had their Club of Rome annual meetings, okay? So this article is by Brandon Smith. In the early 1970s, the U.S. and much of the Western world was shifting into stagflation economy crisis. Nixon removed the dollar completely from the gold standard in 1971 with the aid of the Federal Reserve, or perhaps under the direction of the Fed, which ultimately escalated inflation pressures. Europe's post-war boom came to an abrupt end, while prices on goods, oil, and gasoline in the U.S. skyrocketed until 1981 to 1982, when the Federal Reserve jacked interest rates up to around 20% and created a deliberate recessionary crash. And folks, I was a young man when this occurred. And people in the United States, in some parts of the country, were literally starving. I was down in Camden County, Georgia. It was extremely difficult for people down there. I saw teenagers living out on the edges of swamps, in tents, kicked out by their parents, and there was probably about 10 to 20 of them in one particular group, but several groups out in the swamps, living off of whatever they could, including armadillos. Yes, I saw this with my own two eyes. And I didn't even have enough money. I barely had enough money to feed myself. I was putting roofing on the barracks at Kings Bay Navy Base for $5 a square. That's $5 for every 3 bundles of roofing. I had to get it up on the roof, and some of those roofs were 3 stories high. And that part of the country is much like Parris Island, South Carolina, full of gnats, biting gnats, mosquitoes, and just oppressively hot. This generation has no idea how bad it can get. Interestingly enough, the IMF had created the SDR system in 1969, just before the gold standard was cut, the same SDR which the IMF is poised to use as a foundation of a global digital currency mechanism. I'm telling you, this global digital currency is an incredible disaster waiting to happen. It is the epitome of what is written in Revelation 3 concerning the congregation in Laodicea, where they are miserable, poor, blind, and naked. Because you see, with the digital currency, a digital currency can only exist if there's no Carrington event. You know, the Carrington event, where all of the, there was a, what do you call it, CME explosion in the sun, which sent waves of, let's just go look up Carrington event. A geomagnetic storm. Okay? And it occurred at the 1st to the 2nd day in September 1859, before we had a grid, before there was electrical grid. The Carrington event is the most intense geomagnetic storm recorded in history, peaking from the 1st to 2nd September 1859 during solar cycle 10. It created strong auroral displays that were reported globally and caused sparking, even fires in multiple telegraph stations. The geomagnetic storm was most likely a result of a coronal mass ejection, that's what I was looking for, CME, from the sun colliding with the Earth's magnetosphere. Now, how presumptuous, how haughty does man need to be to believe that he can get away with a digital currency, a global digital currency mechanism? How foolish, how blind, and how naked does society have to be? Well, they want to be completely naked. The time period is often depicted in films as happy-go-lucky era of disco, drugs, hippies, rock and roll, but in reality is that the early 1970s was the beginning of the end for the West. It was a moment that our economic foundations were sabotaged, the house built on sand, and the affluence of the middle class was slowly but surely stolen by inflation. Oh, yes, it was. I remember those days. In the midst of this economic malaise, which Jimmy Carter later referred to as a crisis of confidence, the United Nations and the associated globalist roundtable talks groups were hard at work developing a scheme to convince the population to embrace global centralization of power. Their goals were rather direct. They wanted a rationale for government control of human population numbers. And that right there, folks, is what they're doing right now with the vaccine scam. The power to limit industry, the power to control energy production and dictate energy sources, the power to control or limit food production and agriculture. The ability to micromanage individuals' lives in the name of some later defined greater good. That's a communist term. It's also a fascist term. A socialized society in which the individual right to property is abandoned, a one-world economic system which they would manage. One world currency system, a one world government managed by a handful in separate regions. It doesn't work like that. And I will show you in the scripture, it can never work like that. And Jehovah, the creator of heaven and earth, will not allow it to work this way. In the most revealing quote, one of the most revealing quotes in the agenda comes from the Clinton administration Deputy Secretary of State Strobe Talbot, who stated in Time magazine that in the next century, nations as we know it will be obsolete. And that right there, folks, is the reason why Jehovah, the Elohim of national Israel, will not allow this to succeed. Because if they're going to get rid of nationalities, they will have to erase the name of Israel from the lexicon of all mankind. You see, they've been trying to erase the name of Israel, the Gentiles. Rome have been trying to erase the name of Israel off the face of the earth forever. For centuries, for millennia, they have been trying to do this. And they have nearly succeeded. In the next century, nations, as we know, will be obsolete. All states will recognize a single global authority. And of course, those nations, states, or whatever, who do not recognize their authority will be disappeared, eliminated. National sovereignty wasn't such a great idea after all. They will destroy the whole world, if necessary, to erase the name of Israel forever. This is what it's really about, folks. I know some of you think I'm crazy. No, you're crazy if you don't understand the scripture. To understand how the agenda functions, I offer a quote from Globalist Council on Foreign Relations member Richard Gardner. In an article in a Foreign Affairs magazine in 1974 titled The Hard Road to World Order. In short, the house of world order will have to be built from the bottom up rather than from the top down. In order to do that, you have to destroy the world. I'm not joking. You have to literally destroy civilization. Do you see how insane these people are? Rather than from the top down, it will look like a great booming, buzzing confusion. What is another word for confusion? Babble. To use William James' famous description of reality, but an end run around national sovereignty, eroding it piece by piece, will accomplish much more than the old-fashioned frontal assault. And now I want to go to Daniel 2. Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Now, in the second year, this is Daniel 2 verse 1, second year of reign of Nebuchadnezzar, he dreamed dreams, and his ruach was troubled, and his sleep left him. And the king commanded to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans for to show the king his dreams. And they came and stood about the king, and the king said unto them, I have dreamed a dream, and my ruach has thrust me or forced me to know the dream. In other words, he cannot sleep until he knows what this dream is and what it means. Then spoke the Chaldeans to the king in Aram, Syria. O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will show you the interpretation. The king answered and said unto the Chaldeans, This thing is gone from me. Now if you will not make known unto me the dream with the interpretation thereof, you will be cut into pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill. But if you show this dream, interpretation thereof shall receive gifts from me, and rewards and great honor, and therefore show me the dream and the interpretation thereof. And they answered again and said, Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show you the interpretation of it. And the king answered and said, I know of a certainty that you would gain time, because you see this thing is gone from me. Or you are buying time, because you see this thing is gone from me. But if you will not make known unto me the dream, there is but one decree for you, lying and corrupt words to speak before me, till the time be changed. In other words, you guys are going to be lying to me until the times are changed. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can show me the interpretation thereof. They couldn't. The Chaldeans answered before the king and said, There is not a man upon the earth that can show the king's matter. And that was a lie. as we will see in just a minute. Therefore, there is no king, no lord, no ruler that has asked such a thing of any magician or astrologer or Chaldean, and it is a rare thing that the king requires, and there is no other that can show it before the king except the, as they say, the Elah, whose dwelling is not of the flesh. For this cause the king was angry and furious, and commanded to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. The decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they sought Daniel and his fellows to be slain. Oh, they were going to kill Daniel too. And then Daniel answered with the counsel and wisdom to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, which was gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, "Why is this decree so hasty, so harsh from the king?" When Arioch made this thing known to Daniel, then Daniel went in and desired of the king that he would give him time, and that he would show the king the interpretation. Then Daniel went to his house and made the thing known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and his companions, and that they would desire the mercies of the Elohim of Shemeon concerning this secret, that Daniel and his fellows should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then this secret was revealed unto Daniel in a night vision, and Daniel blessed the Elohim of Shemeon. And Daniel answered and said, "Blessed be the name of Elah forever and ever, for his wisdom and might belongs to him." And what is his name? Blessed be his name forever and ever. His name is Jehovah. He changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom unto the wise and the knowledge to them to know understanding. He reveals the deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light to abide with. I thank you and praise you, Elah of his Ab, that would be Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, who has given me wisdom and might, and has made known unto me what we desired of you, for you have now made known unto us the king's matter. Therefore Daniel went unto Arioch, whom the king had ordained to destroy the wise men of Babylon, and he went and said unto him, "Destroy not the wise men of Babylon, bring me in before the king, and I will show unto the king the interpretation." And when Arioch brought into Daniel before the king in haste, and said, "Thus I have found a man of the captives of Yehudah, that will make known unto the king the interpretation." The king answered and said unto Daniel, whose name he named Belteshazzar, "Are you able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen, and the interpretation thereof?" Daniel answered in the presence of the king, and said, "The secret which the king has demanded cannot the wise men, nor the astrologers, nor the magicians, nor the soothsayers show to the king. But there is Elah in Shemeon, that reveals secrets and makes known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall happen in the last days, the end time. Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed are this. As for you, O king, your thoughts came into above your bed. What shall come to pass hereafter is revealed a secret. He's made it known to you what shall come to pass. But as for me, this secret is not revealed for any wisdom that I have more than any other living, but for cause and reasons to know the interpretation to the king, to know the thoughts of your heart. You, O king, saw and beheld a great image whose brightness was excellent, and stood before you, and the form thereof was fearful. The image's head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, and his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. You saw until a stone was cut out without hand, which smote the image upon the feet that were of iron and clay, and broke them into pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, and the silver, and the gold, and the broken to pieces together. And it became chaff of the summer threshing floor, and the wind carried them all away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. This is the dream. And here comes the interpretation before the king. You, O king, are a king of kings, and Elah of Shemayim has given you a kingdom, a power and strength and glory, and wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the sky, has he given unto your hand, and has made you ruler over them all, and you are this head of gold. King of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, was the head of gold. After you shall arise another kingdom inferior to you. What kingdom was that? It was the Medo-Persian Empire. And a third kingdom of brass. What kingdom was that? That was the Grecian Empire that began with Alexander the Great, which shall bear rule over all of the land. And a fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron. Which kingdom was that? That was Rome. For as much as iron shatters into pieces, and shatters everything, destroys everything, as iron breaks all of these previous kingdoms. There shall be in it the strength of iron, for as much you saw the iron mixed with miry clay. That is further into the ages of that kingdom. And in the end, the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay. Why? Mixing their seed. Okay, let's just read it. So shall the kingdom be partly strong and partly broken. Whereas you saw iron mixed with miry clay, and it shall come to pass that the seed of men, mankind, shall not cling to one another, because iron is not mixed with clay. They are going to try to make a one world government, but they will not succeed. They will, even because they do not cleave to one another, they will start a world war with nuclear weapons, as I showed you. Some of my previous videos, let's go to BitChute. I'll see if I can find them, scroll down and find them. All right. It's going to take a while because I've done a lot of videos, folks. After the nuclear exchange come the two witnesses, Moshe and Eliah, with plagues. Oh, there's going to be a nuclear exchange. I have done quite a few videos talking about the scriptures, where the scriptures are located, that proves that this event is going to occur. And Jehovah is going to make sure it happens. You see, in ancient Babel, he confounded their language. We probably should go ahead and I'm going to finish this right here, and this will tie into Zechariah 14. And in those days, these kings shall the Elah of Shemaim set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom in Israel will not be left to other people, but it shall break into pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. For as much as you saw that stone was cut out of the mountain, which is Mount Zion, without hands, and it had broke to pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great Elah has made it known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. The dream is certain, and the interpretation is absolute, can be trustworthy. You can read on about what Nebuchadnezzar did with Daniel as a result. But now is the time to go to Zechariah 14. You see, just like Jehovah intervened, he came down to see what these people were doing to make themselves a one world government. The same thing is going to happen with these people plotting net zero. What they're doing is demonic. It's either going to be their way or destroy all of humanity off the face of the earth, which just so happens to include all Israel. And the scripture talks about it is a time where if those days were not curtailed, there would be no flesh saved alive. These people are demonic. They want to destroy the whole world population. And they will attempt to do it by any means necessary, including nuclear annihilation. Well, watch this. Zechariah 14. Verse 12, this is the plague wherewith Jehovah, not the Lord, will smite all the people who have ever fought against Jerusalem. Who fought against Jerusalem? Mainly Rome, but not exclusively. The people of Syria, Chaldee, Persia, Greece, Turkey, Great Britain, all of Rome. Now, don't forget, Rome. The Club of Rome. I don't want to, let's see, I'm going to just remember where I was here. The Club of Rome. All right? We'll start right here when I get back. The real enemy is humanity itself. I told you. I told you, folks. This shall be the plague wherewith Jehovah will smite the people who have fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh shall consume away while they stand upon their feet. We know what plague this is. Don't be a fool. You know what the deal is. And their eyes shall consume away in their holes, and their tongue shall consume away in their mouth. The Japanese know exactly what this is. On that day, a great confusion, disquietedness, tumult from Jehovah shall be among them, and they shall lay hold every one on the hand of his neighbor. We just read in Daniel 2 that iron does not mix with miry clay. They're trying to make a one world government, and it ain't going to work. The plague of Jehovah will come upon them. This plague will be a nuclear plague. You can read more about it in Revelation 9, verse 17 and 18. And it gives a more descriptive detail of what's going to happen. Let's go back to this Club of Rome. The globalists have been scheming to use environmentalism as an excuse for centralization, one world government, since at least 1972, when the Club of Rome published a treatise titled The Limits of Growth, funding a limited study of industry and resources in joint project with MIT. The findings appeared to be scripted well ahead of time. The end of the planet was nigh unless nations and an individual sacrificed their sovereignty. That would mean Israel would be forced to hand over its sovereignty as well and cease to exist. How convenient for the globalists bankrolling the study. 20 years later, they would publish a book entitled The First Global Revolution. In that document, they specifically discussed using global warming as a vehicle to form the supranatural governance. In searching for a common enemy against whom we can unite, but iron does not mix with miry clay, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, planet water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. In their totality and their interactions, this phenomenon do constitute a common threat which must be confronted by everyone together. Common enemy, right here. Let us make a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the earth. Let us be united, they said. But in designating these dangers as the enemy, we fall into the trap which we have already warned readers about, namely mistaking symptoms for causes. All these dangers are caused by human intervention in natural processes. And it is only through changed attitudes and behavior can they be overcome. The real enemy then is humanity itself. By making humanity's very existence the great threat, the globalists intended to unify the public around the idea of keeping themselves in check, or keeping you in check. They're not going to keep themselves in check. That is to say, the public would have to sacrifice their freedoms and submit to control in the belief that human species is too dangerous to be allowed liberty. The following news special from the Australian Public Broadcasting Service was aired in 1973, not long after Club Rome was founded, is surprisingly blunt about the purposes of the organization. I wonder if I should play it. I haven't even listened to it. I'm going to take a chance.
It's not some science fantasy effect from 2001. This electronic display emanating from Australia's largest computer is a picture of the condition, past, present and future of planet Earth. The program was originally devised by a scientist working from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, J. Forrester. It was developed under the auspices of the Club of Rome by an MIT research team to present a complex model of the world and what we humans are doing to it. The program, called World 1, doesn't pretend to be a precise forecast. What it does for the first time in man's history on the planet is to look at the world as one system. It shows that Earth cannot sustain present population and industrial growth for much more than a few decades. It shows that simply cleaning up our car exhausts and making some small effort to limit our families simply isn't enough. It's like an electronic guided tour.
Wait a minute. They said limiting car exhaust and limiting family production isn't enough. Limiting, in other words, birth control isn't enough. You heard it. Listen very carefully.
Of our global behavior since 1900 and where that behavior will lead us. Well, this is the printed version of what we've just seen on the television screen. What looks at first to be just a maze of computer characteristics is really a system of very simple graphs which project what's going to happen to the planet over the next 150 years if we don't do something drastic to stop it. Down the left-hand side of the graph is the date, 1900, 1940, 1980, 2020, right down to 2060. Now, each of these lines of letters represents a curve showing some aspect of the condition of the planet. The further out this way they go, the greater that figure is. The further this way, the less. For example, P represents population. So here it is at 1900, and then it comes up to 1940, it starts to take off. Here we are at 1980, up to the turn of the century, and then it starts to peter off. Let's now have a look at this next curve, the Q curve, which is the quality of life. And this is represented by, for example, the amount of space people have, the amount of money they have to spend, the amount of food they have to eat. Now, it increases rapidly up to 1940, but from 1940 on, the quality of life diminishes. And here we are about the turn of the century, and we come up to the year 2020, and it's really come right back. More people, of course, means that you start to chew up your supply of natural resources. And this is this curve here, the N curve. And it shows that slowly but steadily, the pool of natural wealth in the world, natural resources, minerals, oil, and so on, is slowly but steadily diminishing. So this is the situation. As population increases, the quality of life decreases, and the supply of natural resources decreases. But have a look at this curve here. This is called the Z curve, and it represents pollution. Now, predictably enough, as the population increases up to 1980, pollution increases. There's more rubbish. But from 1980 to the year 2020, pollution really takes off. This is assuming, of course, that we don't do anything about it. So the year 2020, the condition of the planet starts to become highly critical. And if we don't do anything about it, this is what's going to happen. The quality of life is going to go right back to practically zero. Pollution is going to become so serious, right out here, that it will start to kill people. So the population will diminish. Right back here, less than it was in the year 1900. And at this stage, around about the year 2040, 2050, civilized life as we know it on this planet will cease to exist. Well, hopefully, of course, it won't be allowed to happen. But it's taken this kind of shock treatment to nudge governments into doing something, and slowly we are. We're starting to clean up our atmosphere. We're starting to recycle our rubbish. We're doing something positive about population control. But so far, our efforts have really been just a drop in the ocean. The Club of Rome comprises some 70 men of widely varying backgrounds, but their common concern is that the world problems cannot be solved by individual nations. I spoke with Professor Hugo Tiemann, director of the Battelle Institute, Geneva, Dr. Aurelio Pache, founder of the club, and Dr. Alexander King, director of the World Bank and the United Nations OECD. Dr. King, now you're describing the world as a closed system where all these things are interrelated, and yet the government, the control of the system is by individual nation states. Now, how do you convince them to cooperate?
The sovereignty of these nations is no longer as absolute as it was. There's a gradual diminishing, whittling away of sovereignty, little bit by little bit. Especially, of course, in the smaller countries where it's more obvious.
What? Especially in the smaller countries. Well, one of the smallest in the world is, Israel.
Countries have to do a good deal of this by agreeing into international arrangements for the law of the seas, or for the limits of fishing, or for control of the wavelengths in radio, and 101 other things. But especially in the technological field, I think this is going to be increasingly so because of developments next year. I was at an important meeting in Washington a couple of weeks ago, and Peterson, the former Secretary of Commerce, was saying the same thing from an economic point of view, that the general world economic situation, the interdependence of countries on their food and fuels and so on, is leading to an interdependence which has seeds of draining away of sovereignty within it. So I don't think one can envisage an idealistic of jumping to a world federalism or anything of that sort. But the building up probably in the next decade in a number of particularly sensitive fields like energy, raw materials, the use of the oceans, space and so on, of a number of what people are tending to call regimes, which will not be ordinary United Nations type of organizations, but semi-management organizations. There'll be a great deal of consent in them.
Dr. Boucher views the European Common Market as an elementary example of the kind of regional cooperative which is going to be necessary. What responsibilities does he see for Australia?
You are in a splendid position.
What should we do?
You have food, energy, space. You are distant from other centers, so you can, for a longer time, feel rather more independent than interdependent. But things of the world are going so fast that I think that an enlightened leadership in Australia should see down the road that Australia will have to lose some of its own self-decisions in order to acquire something else which may be purely political in very wide sense, or maybe also security.
The Club of Rome is reluctant to point the finger at any one nation. Yet clearly nations like the United States, which consumes approximately 60% of the world's resources, will in the Club's view have to accept a severe cutback in its voracious appetite. But the Club's utterances are cloaked in a velvet democracy, in the hope that their facts will gently persuade.
We will ask who is making the decision, and whether the decision makers of today, whether they perceive the problems, what kind of problems, and the interactions of the problems.
Wolves in sheep's clothing they are. That's what they are. What we can derive of this broadcast and its message, the globalists want two specific outcomes most of all. They want the end of national sovereignty and the end of private property through socially incentivized of minimalism. The exact same objective the Club of Rome outlined in the 1970s are the driving policies of the UN and the World Economic Forum today, the sharing economy concept that Klaus Schwab and the WEF often proudly promotes was not thought up by them, it was thought up by the Club of Rome 50 years ago. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. They want half a century inventing a crisis, drum up public terror, and then offer the very solution they wanted to enforce decades ago. In the end, the climate agenda has nothing to do with environmentalism and everything to do with economics. The plan began in the midst of the very real stagflationary crisis, a moment where the middle-class populace was most afraid for the future and prices were rapidly rising. This crisis was not caused by the scarcity of resources. It was caused by mismanagement of the financial system. It's not a coincidence that the culmination of the global warming scheme is taking place today, just as another stagflation disaster is upon us. And that one was also, it is all, and let me tell you something, this global digital currency is a fool's errand. It is the most foolish thing that these guys have come up with yet. Because we are told in Zechariah 14 that the Gentiles are going to be lobbing nukes at each other, and if they start lobbing nukes at each other, there won't be a grid, and if there is no grid, then there is no digital currency. And if they have already abandoned paper currency and moved into digital currency, they are naked. Exactly as written about the congregation in Laodicea in Revelation 3. To the messenger of the church, congregation, ecclesia of Laodicea, write these things, says the truthful one, the faithful and true witnesses, the foundation of the creation of Jehovah. I know your works, that you are neither cold nor hot. I would that you were cold nor hot. But because you are lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I will spew you, I will vomit you out of my mouth. Because you say, I am rich and increase with goods. That's you. Western civilization. And have need of nothing, and you do not know that you are wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and utterly naked. I counsel you to buy of me gold tried in the fire. Folks, that's giving up your life. You see, Yehoshua was tested, and he had to give up his life to prove that he was figuratively made of gold. You see, because fire cannot destroy gold. Fire does purify gold and destroys all the elements around it. The digital currency is going to lead to destitution, starvation, and nakedness. So, is there anything else? The Club of Rome is now a shell of its former glory, filled with silly hippies, most likely because the UN and other globalist think tanks have taken the role of the group used to play. However, the shadow of the original club is ever present, and a strategy of climate fear-mongering is wielding right now to justify increased government suppression of energy and agriculture. If they are not stopped by the public, totalitarian carbon mandates will become the norm. The next generation, it's not going to lead to the next generation, folks. But I'll read it to the end. The next generation living in engineered poverty will be taught from early childhood that globalists saved the world from a calamity that never existed. They will be told that enslavement of humanity is something to be proud of, a gift that keeps the species alive, and anyone who questions that slavery is a selfish villain that wants to destroy the planet. And of course, they would have to be extinguished, which is why they're going to come for Yehoshua when he sets up his kingdom in Jerusalem. That's why they're going to come for him. And he will destroy them. So, hopefully this has helped you get an idea of what they have been planning all these years. It's not going to come to fruition, folks. They are not going to succeed. They cannot stop the end of this world. Because the end of this world has been predicted. In Luke 21, the end of the Gentiles. The Jerusalem has already been destroyed almost 2,000 years ago by the Emperor Vespasian and his prince son Titus. And the Jews, they fell by the edge of the sword, and they were led away captive into all the Gentiles. And Jerusalem was indeed trodden underfoot by the Gentiles. And then here it comes, the words, the key words, until the times of the Gentiles are complete. That means their time is up. Their time has expired. Then come the signs in the sun and the moon and the stars. The signs in the sun turns black like sackcloth of hair. What makes the sun turn into black sackcloth of hair? Explosions, smoke. Joel 2, in the last few verses, it talks about those signs in the sun and the moon and the stars. It says, the sun will turn black and the moon into blood, and there will be, what does it call it? Blood, fire, and tomorrow of smoke. Mushroom or palm-like columns of smoke is what tomorrow means. Palm-like columns of smoke. We just read in Zechariah 14 about nuclear weapons, and you can read in Revelation 9 verses 17 and 18 about 1/3 of man be destroyed by these weapons that man has made. And there is only one kind of weapon that can destroy 1/3 of man in such a short period of time. It is nuclear weapons. It is at that time, when the times of the Gentiles are finished, signs in the sun and the moon and in the stars, upon the earth, distress upon the Gentiles. We read about that distress, Zechariah 14, what they're going to do to each other. Men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming upon the earth, for the powers of the sky shall be shaken, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in a cloud of power, with power and great glory. And when you see these things come to pass, then look up, O Israel. Revelation 11, verse 26. We'll start in 25. For I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own conceits. He's speaking to the Romans in that particular verse. That partial blindness happened to Israel until the times of the Gentiles is complete. And so all Israel, Romans 11 verse 26, shall be saved. Shall be saved. Then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draws nigh. Whose redemption? Israel's redemption. Because Paul said, and so all Israel shall be saved, for out of Zion shall come the deliverer, who will turn unrighteousness from Jacob, because this is my covenant with them when I shall take away their sins. This is when he saves Israel. This is when he saves Jacob. This is when he saves the Jews. This is when he saves Jerusalem. Just as ancient Babel fell, so shall the current Babylon system of Rome that we live in will also fall, and great shall be the fall thereof.